Hi, I'm Belle Holder for UNCTAD Conversations. Today we're at Browns Beach at Carlisle Bay in Barbados. Now, the stretch of beaches along Carlisle Bay are some of the most popular for locals and tourists alike. It's an opportunity to lay out on the beach, snorkel, frolic in the water, swim, or one of my personal favorites, just head out on a catamaran cruise. Well, with beaches this beautiful, I don't have to tell you that international tourist arrivals is a lifeline for Barbados. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic led to lockdowns, grounded commercial flights, the absence of cruise ships, empty restaurants, and dormant tourist attractions that all but brought the industry to its knees and led to thousands being out of work. So how do we redesign tourism in Barbados? How will industry makers pivot? Today's guest has been tackling those and other such questions. Our UNCTAD conversation with the Minister of Tourism and International Transport, Senator Lisa Cummins, is straight ahead. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. Let's just jump right into tourism, which is everybody's business, because tourism is connected to labor and culture and shipping and transport. So how do you see the role of tourism to rebuild the economy post-COVID, or should I say even with COVID as a continued challenge?
Well, I think what's most important right now is to put this in context. So for me, I may be the minister responsible for tourism, but this is also UNCTAD, right? And my background is in international trade policy. And so I have always, since I came to the ministry, approached tourism as a tradable sector, which it is. And for the purposes of international trade, tourism is one of the largest sectors in the services industry, and it crosses over into goods as well. So exactly what you said when you started in your introduction is how we have approached it. But so there's a macro policy level. When we look at arrivals and occupancy rates, that's a normal conversation that Barbados has talked about. We're used to having a million cruise passengers almost. We're used to having close to 2 million overall, both air and sea. We're used to having occupancy rates running from November through April in high season, to low season in the summer months. Those kinds of things, those are normal conversations. But tourism as a driver of the economy is connected to agriculture, because local farmers are providing food to restaurants, they're providing food to the hotels, they're providing food to locals in bars and shops all over the country. You have the entertainment industry, which you talked about. I don't think any of us can get away from the idea that tourism is very much about going to a hotel or a restaurant or a club and seeing live local entertainment. That's very much part of the Caribbean brand of tourism, live, authentic, experiential creativity and culture. But it is also linked to all of the accounting services that have to be provided in the sector. Is linked to the craft village down in Pelican Village, for example, where all of the people who make the handcrafted art and so on, they're also selling to the industry. But beyond that, you mentioned labor. Aside from the 35,000 direct persons employed in the sector, you also have thousands of people who indirectly depend on that. So imagine when you think of Sheraton Mall, for example, one of our malls on the southern coast of the country. Sheraton Mall has a range of stores, and you would imagine that since it's just a local space, that it's connected not to tourism but to the domestic economy. But the people who are spending in Sheraton Mall are actually, yes, visitors, but they're locals who are employed in sectors that are directly and indirectly connected to tourism. So if those people are unemployed or underemployed, or they're not necessarily being able to function in the way that they would have done in, say, that's 2019, then the retail operations in a place that is as unconnected in most people's minds from tourism is also affected. So everything, tourism is very much our business. And the idea that with tourism being in a major slump globally and locally as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is a national economic effort that will be required at this stage to re-energize the sector, get it going, and with it, all of the downstream and all of the upstream goods and services that are connected to tourism.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was something you said there that made me remember, I can't remember if the slogan was from the 80s or the 90s, but it was tourism is our business,
Yes.
and we have to play our part. And
That's
that's probably more true today than it ever was before. And one of the things you also talked about was that authentic experience where people want to see and feel and breathe the tropical air, you know, in terms of tourism. But one of the things that people have been discussing is one of the ways to redirect tourism is, do we move it into the virtual space? Like, what does that look like? What does that feel like for people?
So, incidentally, we actually have been working with the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. to build a virtual tourism platform, because one of the things that, again, and I think we started talking about it just now, about arrivals and occupancy rates, is that you have to be able to, again, for tradable services, monetize every aspect of tourism. And my own focus as the current Minister of Tourism, and based on that international trade background, is looking now at the business of tourism. And the business of tourism tells me that I have to look at the supply chain, the entire value chain, every single aspect that feeds into that, and rationalize how we restructure, how we retool, and how we monetize and extract value from every single segment. And I'll give you an example. If any of us have ever gone on a cruise, for instance, think about a cruise. It's completely vertically integrated. I bought a cruise, I'm staying in a room, all my food, all my meals and everything are paid for, but I have the option of buying add-ons. When I stop off at every different destination along that cruise, I can either purchase my tours on board the cruise line, or I can have a spontaneous interaction once I get off the cruise ship. But the majority of cruise activity is paid for on board the cruise ship. We in Barbados and across the Caribbean more generally, we have to be able to treat the tourism sector as a vertically integrated sector. We have to be able to map that value chain and to take as many bites off of that single cherry as we can. So we talk about that in terms of consumer spending. So consumer spending is mapped by airline travel, airline tickets, food, car rentals, knick-knack purchases, that kind of thing. But what else is there? There's so many other elements of the value chain. Are you franchising local businesses in overseas domiciles in the way trade and services moves so that you're able to extract value and remove the middle players? Are you in a position where, in the same way that you have global brands like sandals and so on, what is the next global brand, and where can it come from? Why not Barbados? How many local companies can you get into the international space as international companies that have domiciled and created commercial presence overseas? Those are all parts of the structure of the new business of tourism that we are focusing on here in the ministry.
Right. So how do you explain to the catamaran operator who's right on the beach waiting for people to show up, or the jet ski guy, all of whom are depending on the same industry, and you start to have that conversation around the virtual space,
Yes.
and they're trying to figure out, what virtual space, like how do I change my business? How can this work for me?
So, if you're going back, because I didn't actually finally get to the final answer on the virtual tourism. Yeah. So we are building in platforms that allow people to experience Barbados and different experiences in Barbados without actually physically being here. And if we use the example of lockdown, every country around the world, for the most part, has gone through some version of lockdown. And when we're in our homes, what do? We're watching telly, we're on our devices, we're eating, we're experimenting with new recipes. Our concept of experimenting with a virtual Barbados is bringing people into our confidence as a people. So what are we sharing with them? If I'm running on the treadmill and I'm exercising to get off that lockdown belly, why am I running on the treadmill and I'm not sharing with you a virtual experience of running through Welshman Hall Gully? Why am I not sharing with you the beauty of the area up by Animal Flower Cave in St. Lucie, where the cliffs are amazing, and I am in my living room or in my workout space, and I am actually having an experience that says, I wish I was in Barbados right now. And when lockdown finishes, I'm probably going to pick up my phone, and we have to then have to translate that, have conversion rates into actual sales. So this person having an experience on their treadmill in their home then says, I really want to come to Barbados. Equally so, there's a Harson's Cave. There are all of these different experiences. How do we take people through a journey of all of these amazing attractions that are Barbados without physically being here? And then once they're able to translate that into an actual visit to the country, how do we then use that to create First, monetization by people paying for it in the first instance from abroad, and then secondly, a redeemable rebate when they actually come to the country and visit the attraction. So the idea is not for us to sell Barbados in a virtual space on a catamaran or underwater or anything like that on its own. It is part of a marketing tool for people to be excited by the idea of actually having a physical experience, having had a taste by a virtual experience, but also having had that virtual experience been monetized.
Yeah, so to make people excited to want to have then the full experience when they can. I think one of the major things when we think about it, and when we start talking about redirecting and redesigning tourism sector, is going to take a massive amount of education and rethinking, because we already have this automatic expectation of what tourism in the Caribbean and what tourism in Barbados is.
And that's been perhaps a big disadvantage for us, because we automatically think tourism is arrivals and occupancy rates and visitors on the beach.
Right. See?
It's so
Sand,
much
surf.
more than that. And that is why I talk about the business of the tradable sector that is tourism. That's
All right, so we're going to continue this conversation right after this. Welcome back to UNCTAD Conversations. We are chatting with Senator Lisa Cummins, who's the Minister of Tourism and International Transport. When we talk about the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc., dedicated to making sure that every person in the world wants a piece of Barbados, and of course pay for it, or want to experience what it's like to be here, how is the organization pivoting?
So that's a really great question. So if you think about the entity that was the Barbados, that is now the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc., it started off as the Barbados Tourism Board. Then it became the Barbados Tourism Authority. Then it transitioned into the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc., and then followed by the Barbados Tourism Product Authority. Now we had a merger of the two, and you have Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. And so we're dealing ultimately still with the primary marketing agency of the country. But in keeping with the policy of creating the business of tourism and looking at maximizing the spend and the earnings and the foreign exchange generation of the sector, as I mentioned before, we are looking at the business of tourism. And so the BTMI is being transitioned and pivoting to treat more to creating that entire value and supply chain around tourism, whereby marketing becomes and is a critical component of what they do. But how do we link the tourism industry in a meaningful and a structural way to international business? How do we link it to investment? And I'm not just talking about attracting investment in hotel plants. I'm talking about green investment. I'm talking about infrastructure transformation in the sector, all kinds of product transformation and development. All of those are things that are now being integrated into the new business model for the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. And so it is no longer going to be, we have amazing marketing teams within the BTMI, people who are contracted in, we have in our international markets as well. We have those persons who are extraordinarily skilled in marketing. But at this time and space in our history, not just Barbados, but I think tourism globally has to transform itself into a far more commercially driven, especially in the Caribbean industry. And that is where the BTMI is being repositioned to go now.
Yeah, I know that the Prime Minister, and she said this publicly, Prime Minister Motley has spoken very strongly about trying, where possible, of course, to keep Barbadians safe in midst of COVID, but she has spoken out adamantly about trying to avoid another total lockdown. I want Barbadians to understand the economic and business implications for a full lockdown.
Well, Belle, I don't know. I think that's perhaps one of the most challenging and the most painful things to navigate. You know, your neighbor, my neighbor, may be one of those people who work upstream or downstream in the tourism industry. They want their children to be able to go back to school. They're among those that their hotels have not fully reopened or their business has not fully reopened. The number of passengers who are coming into the country, which speak to carrying capacity, has not yet reached 2019 levels. They want their lives back, and they want us to be able to help them to get their lives back. And when I say help them to get their lives back, I mean simply doing the things that the public health officials ask us to do in all our best and collective interests. So whether it is being tested, the social distancing, whether it is wearing your mask and considering being vaccinated, those are things that help to keep people safe, because when our numbers continue to rise and we continue to have a significant number of cases, then we have to have a conversation around, do we have to have lockdown around the country? And that puts all those people in jeopardy. We have seen a number of persons completely desperate, without hope, feeling so frustrated because that's their livelihoods. You've seen 2 families in a household who are not yet able to fully be reemployed, and that has an impact on your family life and your mental well-being as well. And so businesses are directly connected to communities, families, and individuals. If we lock down a country, those businesses that have to lock down are not just businesses of nameless, faceless people. They're people who live in our communities next to you and me. And so a lockdown is one of the worst things that any country could go through. And I think the other part of that here is a country does not trade. A country doesn't earn money. Companies and businesses do. And it is by the taxes that those large companies pay as revenue into the state that allow us to buy garbage trucks, that allow us to buy lights, allow us to repave roads, repay debts. It is the revenue that comes in from companies earning. Closing companies down, stopping them from earning, and stopping, therefore, government from collecting revenue and taxes from them is going to not just affect those businesses, but all the social services to which we have become accustomed and to which we are comfortable accepting, but they have to be paid for. And so Barbados is not a Canada that has a booming, huge domestic manufacturing industry, steel industry. It is not the United States that can sustain itself, even if it was to close down. And they too know that they can't do that because they have interests all over the world. It's not we keep comparing ourselves with this country did this and this country did that. We are a small 166 square mile island that imports everything for the most part, because even if we wanted to be more self-sufficient, we simply don't have the land mass and the space to be able to do it. And so the comparisons are unfortunate and they're misguided, but the reality of it is that Barbados and our people are depending on all of us to simply do the right.
Yeah, one of the things that certainly needs to happen is that travelers need to have that confidence and feel comfortable to get on a plane or get on a cruise ship. And I know it will take some international cooperation and collaboration. Can you speak to if there's anything on stream in terms of international cooperation that could help us to get there?
So I think, let me start first of all with where Barbados is. So for cruising, the CDC out of the United States, for example, many of our ships are U.S. flagged ships, and they have a policy: 95% of passengers and 95% of crew must be vaccinated. So they have set a standard for cruising. For air travel, the majority of persons that we're seeing coming into Barbados are vaccinated. The majority. And I want to say that we have people, yes, of course, who are traveling into Barbados who are not vaccinated, but the vast majority are. Now, at the international level for cruise, we have the America's Cruise Task Force, which is currently co-chaired by the President and CEO of Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, Mr. Royal Master Michael Bailey, and Prime Minister Motley, and I serve as her alternate. And there we have looked at the European standards for cruising, the CDC standards for cruising. CARFA, on behalf of the Caribbean, has shared their global standards for their regional standards for cruising, and together we have created a number of best practices. What we would hope for is greater collaboration among countries within the region so that there is coherence. At the international level, there is IATA. I expect to be speaking at IATA during the course of this year, and we will be talking more about standards for international air transport. The World Tourism and Travel Council has also issued a compact, for travel. So there are multiple standards which are evolving. And of course, under the UN World Tourism Organization, they have created a traveler's charter as well that speaks to traveling rights. The fact that most people want to travel, they're fed up with lockdowns and they want to be able to get out. They're making the effort because the cost of traveling, if you're unvaccinated, is prohibitively high because your quarantine times are longer, those kinds of things. So you've got so many international efforts underway to ensure that you have a restart of tourism. I believe that the UN World Tourism Organization has a mantra presently, restart tourism, because that's really where everybody has to go, and let's do it, and us making sure we do so safely and collaboratively.
It's interesting that 2021 is marking the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Yeah. And I remember travel pre 9/11 and post 9/11.
That's right.
Yeah, and remember how it felt strange to us that, what do you mean I can't take water on board? And what do you mean I have to take off all these things and go through the machine where they check for, different chemicals? But we adjusted. So what parallels or what examples can we pull from 9/11 to look at possibly what travel going forward is going to look like?
There's so many examples, Belle. I mean, the idea that everywhere you're going, you're submitting test results or you're submitting vaccine certificates, that in itself is the first standard. That you're required to wear your mask even on board the aircraft. Those are all important criteria. But I think those are things that we each have accepted is going to be the norm. But what I would call on the international community also to accept is that there has been vaccine inequity. So you have small developing countries who have been unable to access vaccines at the same rate that developed economies have been able to. And what that means is that sometimes you have travelers going from one place to the next who are perhaps misguidedly expecting that my rich, developed economy has reached herd immunity. 95% of our people are vaccinated. We don't have to wear masks anymore. Why do I have to travel and I have to adhere to these restrictions? 9/11 is a classic example of why that is necessary, because the dynamics are different in every country. The sensitivities are different in every country. And the vaccine inequity issues are very different in every country. I'm really happy that your country has been able to reach herd immunity and you have been able to reduce some of the restrictions domestically. But internationally for travel, that's not the reality everywhere, and you will have to comply with the requirements everywhere else for that reason.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and continue our UNCTAD conversation. In thinking about an interview, you also, you think about all the questions that you want to ask and the limited time in which you have to do so. And one of the things I was thinking, I was coming in today, is Minister Cummins has got to have it rough. Because one of the things I said at the top of this interview is all of the different sectors that tourism branches out into. But also, one of the things we both said is tourism belongs to all of us. So all of us are armchair tourism specialists, and we have all of the solutions.
I mean, I probably, if I was sitting on the opposite side of the fence, I may be one of the armchair tourism specialists too. Probably not, but maybe. And the truth is that there's been nobody except a current tourism minister who has presided over this environment ever. Tourism, typically, you've had the luxury of your marketing teams who are out there marketing, and so you get to take a great photo and say, I was able to increase arrivals, or I was able to lead to give this result. But the truth of the matter is, this is not that space. It's not that time and space now at all. Being a minister of tourism in this environment cannot be any more about visitor arrivals, because we're not in any event in a space where we can control that. The UK has been historically our largest source market. They were in lockdown for a considerable period of time. Canada was closed for over a year, and they also are one of our major source markets. The US has continued to travel, and it actually has increased in volume, but they too have had their challenges. And so this has not been that time and space. Regional travel, many of our countries have battled lockdowns, and Trinidad was closed also for over a year. We have a major Caribbean Airlines hub out of Trinidad. If Trinidad is closed and their borders are closed, Cal isn't flying in the same way anymore. So this is a different type of tourism ministry, and certainly what we have been required to do in this moment is navigate and mitigate against the risks. We've been able to work with our partners internationally and watch what's happening globally, but also understand that there's so much of it that is out of our hands, but we equally so cannot throw our hands up in the air. The actual reality on the ground is this, Belle. Before there was a COVID, tourism in many ways needed a structural transformation. Before there was a COVID, we needed to look at the business structures of the sector. Before there was a COVID, we needed to look at commercializing and tradables coming out of the tourism sector. And so in this downtime, those are the things that we have to focus on. And the expectation for us is that when COVID is behind us, whenever that is, we're expecting this is going to be with us for some time, 2023 or so. We're not expecting this thing to go away completely. But when we are in that space, we have to have emerged with a new structure around the industry. I can't be that tourism minister who stands in front of the cameras and is able to announce huge arrivals. We're not in that time anymore. That's not the definition of tourism in a COVID environment at all. But it has to be about elevating the tourism structures and what tourism livelihoods will mean to average people at the end of this pandemic.
Yeah. Tourism's impact goes beyond economics, and I think we've really established that in this conversation. Can you share how the sector ties into the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals?
That's actually a great question. So one of the things that we have been able to design with the Barbados Employment Sustainable Transformation Program, the BEST program, which has been a $300 million program in the tourism industry, is one element which focuses on employee re-engagement, another element which focuses on digitization and transformational investments, and that includes things like greening. So we're seeing a lot of properties and tourism enterprises investing in sustainable development activities, particularly as it relates to greening. We're also dealing now at this time with developing an entirely new body of legislation which looks at sustainable tourism development. And so those things are also meant to tie into the SDGs to ensure that there's that sustainability. Then, of course, there's the emphasis for us on women and youth, on gender, I should say, and youth. So those are key elements for us. Poverty and inclusion. Inclusion is a huge deal. We actually have completed a recent audit of the sector, and one of the things that we're looking now is incorporating our communities so that we're able to incorporate the elements relating to the SDGs of entrepreneurship and social enterprise so that everyone has a genuine stake in the tourism sector, and they feel as though this sector genuinely, not by verbiage, but by actual engagement and incorporation and inclusion, this sector belongs to all of us.
What is the status of the welcome stamp visas in terms of people who are here for extended periods of time?
Well, actually, just recently, last week, I was able to help yet another group of welcome stampers who, despite COVID and despite all the challenges, people are still moving to Barbados on a welcome stamp. And we were able to help them clear their goods through customs and be able to get their equipment out, their computers and so on, so that they could work from home. They're going to be here for a year. We have recently passed legislation through Parliament. It was at the end of July last month, where the legislation allowing for the welcome stamp was renewed, and it allows for people to be extended for another year, but also allows for the welcome stamp to be renewed by persons who may just want to have it roll over time. So that's one of the best innovations, and it's critical, especially for a country that traditionally has depended on short stay arrivals, to be able to translate a long stay visitor into a local resident.
Because we know we're going to be weathering this for a little while longer, nobody has a magic wand, no one knows. What social and economic protection exists for tourism workers?
So the BEST program that I mentioned earlier is perhaps the biggest one. So of the $300 million that has been allocated for the overall sector, $207 million of that is earmarked to employee re-engagement. And that's not just for people staying at home and being able to get a benefit. What it is a subsidy to employers to be able to bring their workers back out. And so employers are required to bring back a minimum of, I believe, 70% of their workforce at 80% of their insurable earnings. And these are people who are then able to come back out, benefit from training, re-engagement, on-the-job exposure, so that until such time as the industry is functioning at maximum capacity, people are still in their jobs and being engaged. And engaged is not just on the job, but being mentally and socially engaged, because that's also important for people. For us as Barbadians, we know that we need to be able to interact with people.
In the minute that we have left, any other details that you'd like to add about the sector?
I think the one thing that I would want to perhaps say at this time is that financing for tourism development is really going to be a critical component going forward. How do we finance the sector? How do we attract new mechanisms of capitalization? And that's going to be a critical conversation going forward. We'd love to have partners working more closely with us, of course, international partners as well. Development aid is not necessarily one of those things you typically see in the tourism sector, but this is going to be critical for the sector that has been most badly affected globally by COVID-19.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you so much for having me.